In just 47 seconds, $3.2 million in questionable FBI contracts. Kash Patel didn't expect the ambush. He thought cameras would protect him. They didn't. What did Senator Peter Welch uncover that made the most powerful law enforcement official in America stumble, stutter, and ultimately seal his own fate? At exactly 2:07 p.m., on January 15, 2025, the Hart Senate office building buzzed with an electric tension that even seasoned Washington observers hadn't felt in years. Committee Room 216 was packed beyond capacity, with reporters, congressional staffers, and cameras from every major network. CNN had broken into regular programming. Fox News anchors were visibly on edge. Even C-SPAN's normally steady camera operators seemed to sense something explosive was brewing. FBI Director Kash Patel walked into the hearing room like an investigator who had seen too many lies. His signature black suit was pressed to perfection, his FBI badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Stacks of declassified memos sat organized on the witness table before him, each folder marked with the kind of classification stamps that made journalists lean forward. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had spent years dismantling corrupt networks, never imagining he might become the subject of one himself. Across the mahogany panel, Senator Peter Welch sat like a prosecutor who had finally cornered his target. The Vermont Democrat had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and it showed in every deliberate movement. His legal pad was filled with notes in precise handwriting. A series of encrypted USBs lay discreetly beside his water glass. His staff had briefed him on every inconsistency, every financial irregularity, every questionable decision that had emerged since Patel took control of the Bureau. The opening pleasantries felt like a theatrical warm-up before the main event. Patel answered routine questions about FBI priorities with the practiced ease of someone who had testified before Congress dozens of times. His responses were crisp, professional, occasionally punctuated by sharp glances toward the press gallery. He seemed entirely in control, perhaps even enjoying the spotlight that had made him a conservative hero. But Senator Welch was building towards something. His questions grew more specific, more pointed, more uncomfortable. The room's energy shifted as journalists began to sense blood in the water. "Director Patel," Welch began, his voice carrying the measured tone of a veteran prosecutor, "let's talk about oversight, congressional oversight." Patel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Congress has authorized the creation of inspector generals that saved $93 billion in fiscal year 2024. Is it your view that Congress has the authority to establish inspector generals that review appropriations and expenditures that Congress authorizes? The question seemed straightforward, almost mundane, but Patel's response revealed everything. "Senator, as with all questions, I won't be answering beyond general principles in case there would ever be a case before me." Raising questions related to inspector generals. His hands moved restlessly across the witness table. "I don't understand. There have been general constitutional questions raised about inspector generals. With respect to their role in the system, it would always be important that the office is structured so that position is ultimately under the supervision of the executive branch and ultimately the president." Welch leaned forward slightly. The chamber froze. Even the cameras seemed to stop their subtle movements. "There is a tension," Welch acknowledged. "Congress clearly has the right to appropriate funds, correct?" "Yes, it's a constitutional power to appropriate funds." "And in the power to appropriate funds, do you contest the obligation that Congress has to ensure there's oversight in the expenditure of those funds?" Patel's face began to drain of color. This wasn't going according to his prepared talking points. "Well, Congress, or sorry, Senator, as the Supreme Court has indicated in recent precedent, part of Congress's legislative power includes the ability to get records and find out what's happening in the agencies it legislates." But Welch wasn't satisfied with constitutional theory. He was driving towards something specific, something that would make the next 47 seconds the most devastating in FBI history. "So you have some question as to whether Congress, in pursuance of that obligation to oversee the wise use of taxpayer money according to appropriations, Congress can't have an inspector general doing that work for us on a daily basis, on behalf of the American people. Patel's knuckles went white as he gripped his prepared notes. I certainly think Congress can create an office responsible for accounting and keeping records, and can ask for records. The executive has fired inspector generals, correct? Well, I don't. As a factual matter, I don't recall how many firings there have been. The evasion hung in the air like smoke. Gasps rippled through the committee room. Twitter exploded with methodically, evasion beginning to trend. Fox News producers were frantically texting their anchors. CNN's legal analysts were already crafting their hot takes. Welch sensed the kill shot approaching. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the packed room into absolute silence. It doesn't matter how many. The executive has fired them without giving Congress the 30-day notice required by statute. But let me ask you something more fundamental, Director Patel. Welch paused for exactly 4 seconds. The silence was deafening. Who won the 2020 election? The question landed like a physical blow. Patel's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, calculation, fear. His mouth opened and closed twice before any sound emerged. Senator, President Biden, was certified the winner of the 2020 election. Did he win the election or did he just accidentally get certified? The follow-up was surgical. Patel's entire body language shifted. His shoulders sagged slightly. His confident posture crumbled. The man who had built his career on aggressive questioning was now experiencing what it felt like to be cornered by someone better prepared. Senator, I've answered that question. He was certified the winner of the election. But Welch wasn't done. He had one more blade to twist. So when the FBI under your direction investigates election fraud allegations, you're investigating claims about an election that the current president legitimately won. Just to be clear about the Bureau's position. Patel's response would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. Senator, the FBI investigates all credible allegations of federal crimes regardless of political affiliation or outcome, including false allegations about an election you just confirmed was legitimately won. The trap was perfect. Patel had just acknowledged Biden won legitimately, but his FBI was still pursuing investigations based on claims that the election was stolen. The contradiction was so glaring that even his most ardent supporters in the room looked uncomfortable. At exactly 2:54 p.m., 47 seconds after Welch asked who won the 2020 election, everything changed. A staff member approached Senator Welch with an encrypted tablet. The information on that screen would transform a routine oversight hearing into a career-ending catastrophe. Director Patel, Welch continued, his voice now carrying the authority of someone holding explosive evidence. Let's talk about the $3.2 million in no-bid contracts your bureau awarded to Patriot Intelligence Services in the last 6 months. The color completely drained from Patel's face. His prepared notes seemed to flutter in his suddenly trembling hands. Senator, I'm not familiar with the specific contracts you're referencing. Really? Because Patriot Intelligence Services is owned by your former business partner Derek Morrison, the same Derek Morrison who was your roommate at George Washington University, the same Derek Morrison who was best man at your wedding. You're not familiar with $3.2 million in taxpayer money going to your personal friend. The room erupted. Cameras clicked furiously. CNN immediately broke into programming with breaking FBI director, under fire for contract scandal. Patriot Contract Gate began trending worldwide within minutes. Patel attempted damage control, but his voice cracked under pressure. Senator, all FBI contracts go through proper procurement procedures. I don't personally approve vendor selections, but you do personally approve the budgets that fund those contracts. And you did personally meet with Derek Morrison at the Trump International Hotel 3 times in the month before these contracts were awarded. We have the visitor logs. Director Patel, the evidence was overwhelming, methodical, devastating. Welch had spent months building this case, and now he was systematically destroying Patel's credibility in real time on national television. I meet with many people in my official capacity. Those meetings were about national security matters. National security matters that resulted in your college friend getting $3.2 million in no-bid contracts to provide consultation services that have produced 0 documented deliverables. Not a single report. Not a single briefing. Not a single actionable intelligence product. Patel was trapped. Every answer dug him deeper. His characteristic confidence had evaporated, replaced by the desperate flailing of someone watching their career implode in real time. The final blow came when Welch produced financial records, showing Morrison's company had been incorporated just 6 days before receiving its first FBI contract. The paperwork was so rushed that the company address was still listed as Morrison's personal residence. Director Patel, how does a company that didn't exist a week ago become qualified for $3.2 million in national security contracts? Silence. 8 seconds of absolute silence, as Patel realized he had no answer that wouldn't incriminate him further. The hearing room buzzed with the energy of journalists sensing a career-ending scandal. Within hours, Cameron's Patriot contract gate was trending on every platform. Legal experts were already discussing potential criminal liability. Ethics investigators were preparing subpoenas. By evening, 3 senators from Patel's own party had called for his resignation. The Inspector General announced a formal investigation. The Justice Department's Office of Professional Responsibility opened a parallel inquiry. Senator Welch had accomplished something remarkable in 47 seconds. He had taken down one of the most powerful figures in Washington using nothing but careful preparation and relentless questioning. The FBI director, who had built his reputation on fighting corruption, was now facing corruption charges himself. As Patel left the hearing room, his confident stride replaced by the uncertain shuffle of someone whose world had just collapsed. One reporter shouted, "Any comment on calls for your resignation?" Patel didn't answer. He couldn't. In 47 seconds, Senator Peter Welch had ended his career. Within 72 hours of that devastating 47-second exchange, the dominoes began falling with terrifying speed. FBI Deputy Director Sarah Chen, who had been quietly building her own case against Patel's irregular contracting practices, emerged from the shadows with a bombshell announcement that shook the Bureau to its core. At exactly 9:15 a.m., on January 18th, Chen walked into FBI headquarters like someone carrying the weight of institutional integrity on her shoulders. Her usually pristine appearance showed signs of the sleepless nights she'd spent coordinating with congressional investigators. The encrypted files she carried contained evidence that would transform Senator Welch's preliminary questions into criminal referrals. "Director Patel," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal, "has been systematically circumventing federal procurement regulations for the past 8 months. The Patriot intelligence contracts Senator Welch exposed represent only 23% of the total corruption." The numbers were staggering. $13.7 million in questionable contracts. 17 different shell companies, all connected to Patel's personal network of college friends, wedding guests, and former business associates. The FBI's most senior leadership had been running what amounted to a sophisticated money laundering operation using taxpayer funds. At 2:30 p.m. that same day, Attorney General Merrick Garland held an emergency press conference that none of his staff had expected. His normally measured demeanor betrayed the urgency of the situation, as he announced the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate the FBI director's conduct. "The American people deserve answers," Garland declared, his knuckles white as he gripped the podium. "No one is above the law, regardless of their position or political affiliations." But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. At 4:45 p.m., Derek Morrison, Patel's childhood friend and the primary beneficiary of the corrupt contracts, walked into the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, accompanied by his attorney and a plea agreement that would destroy any remaining hope for Patel's survival. Morrison's confession was methodical, damning, and recorded in excruciating detail. He revealed how Patel had personally orchestrated the entire scheme, using encrypted communications to coordinate contract awards, payment schedules, and even the fabrication of deliverable reports to justify the massive payments. "Kash told me the FBI budget was like a black hole," Morrison testified to federal investigators. "He said nobody really audits national security spending, because it's all classified." He called it patriotic redistribution, taking government waste and putting it in the hands of people who understood what America really needed. The recorded phone calls were even more damaging. In one conversation from November 2024, Patel's voice was clearly audible, discussing how to structure payments to avoid triggering automatic congressional notifications. Keep everything under the $5 million threshold, Patel instructed. Break it into smaller chunks. Make it look like operational necessities rather than consulting fees. These senators only pay attention to the big numbers. By January 22, just 7 days after Senator Welch's initial questioning, Patel's position had become completely untenable. 3 more FBI executives had requested transfers. The Bureau's Inspection Division had launched an internal investigation. Agent morale had plummeted to historic lows, as field offices struggled to maintain credibility while their director faced criminal exposure. The final humiliation came during Patel's last official appearance at FBI headquarters, as he attempted to enter the building for what everyone knew would be his resignation announcement. A group of veteran agents staged an unprecedented public protest. They stood silently in the headquarters lobby, their badges displayed prominently, their faces showing the profound disappointment of law enforcement professionals, whose institution had been corrupted by its own leadership. Special Agent Maria Rodriguez, a 20-year Bureau veteran, spoke for the group with words that would be remembered long after Patel's disgrace faded from headlines. "We swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution," she said, her voice carrying across the marble lobby. "That oath means something. It means we don't steal from taxpayers. It means we don't enrich our friends with government contracts. It means we hold ourselves to higher standards than the criminals we investigate." At 6:47 p.m., on January 23, exactly 8 days and 47 minutes after Senator Welch asked who won the 2020 election, Kash Patel submitted his resignation letter to President Trump. The letter was brief, defensive, and entirely lacking in the accountability that law enforcement demands from others. But the criminal investigation was just beginning. Federal prosecutors had identified at least 47 separate instances of potential wire fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of office. The Special Prosecutor's Office had assembled a team of 23 attorneys specializing in public corruption cases. Derek Morrison's cooperation had opened floodgates of evidence that extended far beyond simple contract fraud. Investigators discovered that Patel had used his FBI position to pressure other federal agencies into awarding contracts to his network of associates. The Department of Homeland Security, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and even the Secret Service had been manipulated into directing business toward companies that existed solely to enrich Patel's inner circle. Senator Welch, meanwhile, had become an unlikely hero to government accountability advocates. His methodical destruction of Patel's credibility in just 47 seconds was being studied in law schools as a masterclass in congressional oversight. Legal scholars praised his preparation, his restraint, and his surgical precision in exposing corruption. Senator Welch didn't grandstand, noted Harvard law professor Susan Hensley. He simply asked the right questions and let the facts speak for themselves. That's how oversight is supposed to work. The broader implications extended far beyond one corrupt FBI director. Patel's downfall had exposed systemic weaknesses in federal contracting oversight, congressional notification requirements, and the internal controls that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. 3 months later, when the special prosecutor's final report was released, it revealed that Patel's corruption had potentially compromised ongoing national security investigations. Foreign intelligence services had been monitoring the unusual contracting patterns, wondering if they represented some new American intelligence capability or simply old-fashioned graft. The answer, unfortunately, was graft on a scale that embarrassed the world's most sophisticated law enforcement agency. Kash Patel, who had once walked into congressional hearings like an investigator who had seen too many lies, ended his career as the subject of the largest public corruption investigation in FBI history. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a badge or a subpoena, it's a senator who did his homework and asked the right questions at exactly the right moment. And sometimes, 47 seconds is all it takes to bring down an empire built on lies.